Hello ladies and gentlemen. Today in War Thunder we're going to be talking about the dev server and tier 6 vehicles. At the moment it is only tanks, and they said that they're going to be looking at how to implement aircraft, but I'm pretty sure that's going to be not exactly easy to do. So we'll stick to the tanks for now. When I started playing jets against propeller aircraft around 2 years ago, I advocated for a wall between jets and propeller aircraft. Even if we take the propeller aircraft, which are good against jets, the experience itself of propeller on jet combat is not a fun one, in my opinion. It is trying to catch them out on a head-on. If they miss, and you miss, then nothing happens and they just fly away, and then they set it up again. It's pretty much, if you're facing a full team of P-47s and BF-109s, that's basically how it feels like, apart from they have a hell of a lot more power than you, and they also have a lot more weaponry. When we look at tier 6 tanks, I feel like a very similar problem is going to occur. With the next batch of tier 6 tanks being put into the game, we have 3 sets of different armor. We have the Chieftain Mark 10's armor, we have the MBT-70's armor, and we also have the ERA armor, which is present on the M60A1 Rise. Now these 3 sets of armor are all pretty good against the main shells that the majority of tier 5 tanks use. If we look at something like the Leopard A1A1, which sits at 8.0 at this moment in time, it has access to Sabo, Hesh, and HeatFS. Now the Leopard A1A1 is seen as one of the best tanks at 8.0, disregarding ATGMs for this moment in time. So it has access to Sabo, HeatFS, and Hesh. These new vehicles are designed to stop Hesh and HeatFS, leaving you to only use the Sabo round. And the Sabo round in itself is not as good as the tier 6 Sabo rounds that we've seen on the dev server. Now you may be thinking, well, what about the T55A? The T55A does have access to the APFS DS round. It is still not as good as some of the rounds that we're going to be seeing at tier 6, and at the same time, all of the tier 6 vehicles that we've seen are going to be the same BR of the current T55A. Now obviously on the dev server it is all subject to change. I would be highly surprised if something like the MBT-70 sits at 8.3, since it would be fighting stuff like the T55A, the IT-1. If we look at the Germans, it will be fighting the Leopard, and even something as low as the Jagdpanzer 4.5 or the Hanomag Henschel Jagdpanzer 4.5. Because that is a tier 5 vehicle, it is a 1.0 BR lower than you, and therefore you could actually go up against something like an MBT-70 in it. The same can be said for the T-54-1947. It sits at 7.3, it is also a rank 5 vehicle. Can you imagine taking out a T-54-1947 and having the displeasure of being put into a tier 6 match? Now the way the current matchmaker works at this moment is you are able to go up or down 1.0 BR. At the same time you can only go up or down 1 rank. So you aren't able, as a rank 1 vehicle, to get into a rank 3 match, even if your BR dictates it. There are some interesting examples for this. If we look at the H8K3 for the Japanese, it used to be... Actually no, this is the example which is better. We have the H8K2, right? It is a tier 1 vehicle, but it is at a 3.3 BR. Now, that is among some of the highest rank 2 vehicles, and if we look at something like the A6M2 or the J2M2, generally those vehicles will get into tier 3 matches, but because the H8K2 is in tier 1, it cannot get dragged up into tier 3 matches. So that's basically how that works. So if you're in a tier 4 vehicle and you have the 7.3 BR, generally you won't have to worry about facing tier 6 vehicles. The issue is, there is pretty much no 7.3 vehicles in Tier 4, and the ones which may be present right now, or maybe getting some BR changes, are getting pushed up to Tier 5. So what I'm looking at is you have something like a T64A. It has an amazing gun, a decent reload, decent sets of ammo, incredible speed, and armor which is just miles better than anything that you have at Tier 5. You've got to understand that tanks are very much set in their eras. What I mean by that is there is tank design, and if you look at it from even World War I onwards, you will see at World War I there was a distinct idea of how tanks should be. In the interim period between the wars, the same ideas. During the wars, kind of the same ideas, but with some experimentation. But after the wars, the tank design element of how everything works, especially when it came to the guns and especially when it came to the armors, they took a step up. They went into 5th gear compared to what we see in World War II. So we already have a lot of vehicles which are post World War II in game, but they do not have a lot of the advantages that these Tier 6 vehicles are going to have in the game. Now I understand we're only getting 2 Tier 6 vehicles per nation at this moment in time for America, Germany, Russia and the UK, so at this moment it might not be a great idea to put a wall between Tier 6 and Tier 5 vehicles, especially since we don't have a Tier 6 aircraft yet. So from that point of view, what I'm talking about is the future. And in the future, once we get more and more of these Tier 6 vehicles, what is going to happen is exactly what happens to 7.0 vehicles right now. If you get matched up into a higher BR match, then you're pretty much screwed. The M46, the T32, the M46 before it got its HeatFS shell, the T32 at this standard moment in time, the M46 Tiger, which also has the HeatFS, but let's just go with the T32, and then how about we go for the Panther 2? If you take out the Panther 2 and you fight at 7.0, you may have a few issues since the IS-6 is in the game, but you will generally be okay. You will be able to penetrate enemies, you will be able to outsmart them, you will be able to use that wonderful gun and do some amazing things. But if you get matched up into a 7-7 match, and IS-4Ms start rolling around, T-54 1951s start rolling around, and the ZSU-57-2 starts rolling around, then there's not really a lot you can do. You become an incredibly supportive character in the battle. You are not going to be somebody who is able to play the game how maybe you're used to. You're going to have to be put into a spot where you're going to have to wait for the enemy to push, and hopefully you're able to penetrate the front of something like a T-54, and maybe you can hit that little triangle on the IS-4M. That is what I see happening with vehicles right now which are in that 7.3 bracket. Just looking at Russia for the moment, the T-54 1947. It is quite a nippy vehicle. It doesn't have access to HeatFS or HESH, but it does have good APCR and good APHE rounds. 210mm for the APHE, APCR is 250mm respectively. So with that, will you be able to penetrate a lot of the vehicles you come up against? Well, it depends how composite armor works, doesn't it? And it depends how the Chieftain Mark X's armor works out. At the same time, you'll have ATGMs flying at your face. And to be quite honest, I think it would be a quite horrifying thing to be able to deal with. Imagine if you get a stock T-54 and you take it into battle, and everybody is playing the high tier 8.3s, because, well, guess what? They're the new tanks and everyone's playing them. So, what you do is you play a few games, you realize how outmatched you are, and then you just basically throw your computer or your PlayStation out of the window, because there is no way you can be able to even do anything against these vehicles. And this was the issue with 6.7. 6.7 as a BR is generally not too bad. A lot of people will disagree when I say that 6-7 as a BR, if you just took it as a BR with itself, it is quite fun to play. The issue is, once at 6-7, if you were ever up-tiered to 7-0 or 7-3, then you start having issues when you play as nations which aren't Russia. So therefore, that theory is just going to be extended to 7-7 and 7-3, where you have machines which literally have no advantage over their counterparts that they're going to be fighting, and therefore it's just going to be a terrible experience, and that's not even thinking about the modifications. I'm also an advocate for the idea that modifications, there should be key ones that would change or alter your BR by 0.3 or something to that effect. The number itself doesn't matter, the idea is the part that matters. So, let's say you run an IS-3, right? You have a 122mm gun, but you don't have parts, you don't have FPE, and you don't have anything else. I would be completely fine with the IS-3 being 7-0 if it does not have parts or FPE. Once it gains those two key modifications that every tank needs to survive, then it gets put to 7-3, and then once it unlocks all of its modifications, then it goes to 7-7. That would be the general idea, have a BR spread for tanks depending on their modifications. Because if you start running in with a T-54-47 or even a T-54-51, and let's say you're stock, and you start running into these tier 6 tanks, what are you going to be able to do against them? Well, you're not going to be able to penetrate them in the T-54-1951. This is a 7-7 vehicle, by the way, so you're probably going to run into them quite a lot. Even the T-62, if you don't have its upgraded APFS DS, you might struggle against a lot of the enemies that you're fighting, and the Heat FS becomes pretty much useless depending on how the armor is actually going to work instead of random demonstrations that people keep pointing me to. I don't care what Gaijin is showing when it comes to the videos that they're producing. I care about how it's going to work in game, and my reference is spaced armor. They talked a lot about spaced armor and how it's going to work, and it doesn't. It doesn't work functionally in the game. So yeah, we're going to have to see when that comes out. But anyway, T-54-1951. You start off with a very terrible round, the BR-412. It has 210mm of penetration. You don't start off with parts or FPE. You don't start off with the Heat FS shell that everybody uses at this moment. You do not start off with the Sabo, which is tier 4 right now. Both of those ammunitions are tier 4. Are you going to tell me you are going to have a pleasant time in this game in the T-54-1951 if all you're facing is tier 6 vehicles plus ATGMs on top of that, which already make the game a pretty bad experience in my opinion? Now obviously some tanks are going to fare better than others. You may say I'm picking an extreme case here, and that's fair enough. How about the Centurion Mark 10? It's at 7-0, so you won't be getting into A3 battles. Good stuff. What about the Swingfire? The Swingfire is getting an upgrade, basically, when it comes to tier 6. And the Swingfire itself is going to be the same BR, because the ATGMs themselves are exactly the same. And hopefully, the Swingfire should be as fast, but I highly doubt it. But anyway, let's move on to something that will actually fight them. The Conqueror. The Conqueror sits at 7.3. It can get into 8.3 battles. It has APDS, 362mm, and HESH. Well, the HESH should be pretty useless. So therefore, you are stuck using Sabo rounds. Now that may be great, but you've got to remember the Conqueror itself has a 20-second reload. The majority of the tanks that have been put in the game have sub or the same as 10-second reload that you're going to have to be dealing with. It's going to be very similar to the Chieftain Mark V's reload and the Mark III's at 10 seconds. Everything is going to be around that area. So for every one shot you're going to fire, the enemy is going to fire 2, plus they have better armor than you, even though you're a heavy tank, plus they have a better gun than you, plus they have artillery on their side when you don't, and yeah, you get smoke grenades, but have fun grinding it out. The main reason why I would like a barrier between tier 6 and tier 5 is basically because of how the modification system works. And it is the exact same reason for aircraft when it comes to jets. A stock jet is manageable against propeller machines. It can actually do very well against propeller-driven machines. But a propeller-driven machine which is stock can do absolutely nothing to a jet. And any good jet player will tell you this, because they can just run circles around you. If you've ever seen a very good pilot in something like a Yak 15, which is one of those vehicles which really shouldn't do well, but it does, because it constantly gets faced up against propeller aircraft. And if you get a good jet pilot, they will just destroy you. They will absolutely massacre you. And I think that's exactly what's going to happen here. You're going to get a lot of people who are going to be grinding through rank 5 because they've heard about these new vehicles, and then you're going to have a bunch of people who have bought through to tier 6, and what's going to happen is they're just going to murder everything in tier 5 because, well, they just have better armor, they have a better gun, they have better everything, and they all will have artillery because they're all technically medium tanks. Apart from the ATGM launcher from Britain, they should all have artillery. So, yeah, it's as simple as that. It's going to be absolute chaos for anybody who's trying to break into the tier 5 in the 7-3 and above area. You're going to have to contend with ATGMs, you're going to have to contend with tanks which were built or made 20 years after yours were. There is not really a lot you're going to be able to do, and it's going to be a tough slog through that, and I put that down to the tier 6 vehicles, but also the ATGMs, which I think was probably one of the worst decisions Gaijin made. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and we will be having more updates 1.71 content when it comes out. There are already a few vehicles that I'm definitely going to do some reviews on. I'll catch you next time.